There's a moment in life that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but inside, it changes everything. It's when you sit alone in a room that should feel like a victory, and instead, it feels like a question. Not a small one you can solve and move past, but something deeper, heavier. A question that doesn't leave. It stays with you, quiet and patient, waiting for you to finally face it. I've had that moment more than once. And today, what I want to share with you comes directly from inside one of those moments. I've spent most of my life trying to understand reality. Not just casually thinking about it, but fully committing to it, studying the universe, its laws, its structure, everything from the smallest particles to the largest cosmic systems. For years, I believed something very simple and very powerful. If I could understand the underlying laws of the universe, if I could find the right equations and the correct picture of reality beneath all the apparent chaos, then I would have done something meaningful. I would have mattered. Now, here's the truth about that belief. It isn't wrong, but it's incomplete. And that incompleteness comes with a cost, a quiet cost that builds over years, even decades, until one day you stop and realize something important was missing all along. A variable that was never included. A factor no one told you to account for. Today, I want to talk about foundations. Not just the foundations of physics, although we will get there, but the foundation of a life. Because over time, I've come to understand that these two things are not separate. The way we try to understand the universe reflects how we build our own lives. And sometimes, the assumptions we trust the most are the ones we should question the hardest. When I was young, truly young, in that way where the future feels endless, I fell in love with physics. Not as a career, not as a plan, but as something deeper. It felt like discovering something real in a way nothing else had. Equations that could describe nature. Numbers that could explain everything. It felt like standing on a coastline no one had ever seen before. And I gave myself to it completely. I gave it my time, my mornings, my nights, the hours most people spend with others, conversations, dinners, quiet moments with people. I traded those for ideas, for problems, for the pursuit of understanding. And I did it willingly because I believed it mattered more than anything else. Here's the confession. I believed that understanding the universe was the most important thing a person could do. And in some ways, I still believe that. The pursuit of knowledge is one of the most human things we have. We are the only species that looks at the night sky and asks not just what is there, but why. We build machines to look back in time. We write equations to describe black holes. We wonder if the laws we observe are the only possible laws. That curiosity is extraordinary. It's worth dedicating your life to. But here's what I got wrong. I confused something being worth a life with it being worth all of a life. I treated time like it would always be there, like something I could spend later. But physics itself teaches us something different. Time moves forward. Entropy increases. Moments don't come back. You don't get a second chance at a conversation you didn't have. And that realization changes everything. Because once you see it, you start to understand that the foundation you've been building on might not be complete. And that's where the real story begins. And that's where the real story begins at the level of the foundation. Because in physics, just like in life, everything depends on what you build on. And for most of modern science, we've been building on a set of assumptions so deep, so ingrained, that we rarely stop to question them. They sit beneath the equations, beneath the models, quietly shaping everything we think we know. One of the most important of those assumptions is something called locality. It's the idea that what happens here is determined by what is here. That influence travels through space step by step, cause leading to effect, nothing jumping ahead or acting at a distance without a clear path. It's intuitive. It's clean. It's the kind of idea that makes the universe feel understandable. This picture goes back centuries. Newton gave us a version of it. Maxwell refined it. Einstein reshaped it into something even more powerful. It works. It explains an enormous amount of what we observe. But here's the uncomfortable truth. At the deepest level, it's not entirely correct. Not in the obvious way where a theory fails and gets replaced, but in a more subtle way. The kind of wrong that still works, still predicts outcomes, still builds technology but misses something essential underneath. Like a map that gets you where you need to go but doesn't show the terrain accurately. Quantum mechanics forced us to confront this. It revealed something that took decades to fully absorb. The universe is not fundamentally local. It's not made of separate pieces sitting in space, each only interacting with its neighbors. Instead, it's entangled, deeply connected in ways that don't depend on distance. Two parts of a system can be separated by enormous space, and still behave as if they are linked. Not through a signal traveling between them, but through something more fundamental, something that exists before space itself. We have the math to describe this. We can calculate it with precision, but understanding it conceptually, that's still incomplete. And here is the real confession. We built modern physics, quantum field theory, the standard model, even much of string theory on a foundation we knew wasn't fully solid. We leaned on locality because it made the math manageable, because it allowed us to make progress. It worked. And because it worked, we kept going. But the deeper question whether the foundation itself was right, we postponed. We handed it forward like a debt we chose not to pay yet. I'm not saying this as an outsider. I was part of that process. I built models, defended ideas, and worked within frameworks that I knew rested on assumptions I couldn't completely justify. Not because I didn't care, but because the alternative was overwhelming. Sometimes the problem is so large you don't even know where to begin. So you work with what you have. But here's the cost of that choice. Eventually, the structure begins to strain. The unanswered questions come back, not as small puzzles, but as major obstacles. And in physics today, we are facing one of those moments. The biggest example is the attempt to unify quantum mechanics with gravity. It's one of the deepest problems in science, and despite decades of effort, it remains unsolved. Not because we lack intelligence or tools, but because the issue may be rooted in the foundation itself. You cannot solve a problem by ignoring the level where it exists. And this is where the connection to life becomes unavoidable. Because a life is also built on a foundation, not all at once, but slowly, through small decisions. Where you put your attention, where you invest your time, what you choose to prioritize. And just like in physics, you often don't question that foundation while things seem to be working. I built my life around understanding, around the belief that figuring things out was the highest goal. And for a long time it worked. It gave me purpose, recognition, a structure I was proud of. But there were things that didn't fit into that structure. One of them was presence. Not presence in the sense of being physically somewhere, but truly being there with another person. Fully engaged, not distracted, not divided. That kind of presence requires a different kind of attention. Slower, softer, less driven. And I didn't give enough of that. The people closest to me lived alongside someone who was often somewhere else in his mind. And I didn't fully see the cost of that until much later. Until I stepped back far enough to notice what had been missing all along. The variable I never included in the equation. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The realization stays with you, and it forces you to look at everything differently, both in physics and in your own life. There is a concept in thermodynamics that explains this more clearly than almost anything else. It's called irreversibility. A process is irreversible when it moves in one direction and cannot simply be undone. Heat flows from hot to cold. Systems move toward disorder. Entropy increases. And no matter how elegant the equations are, they do not run backward in reality. You cannot recover what has already been spent. Human life works the same way. Time moves forward, moments pass, choices accumulate, and the idea that you can always return later and correct things is, in most cases, an illusion. The years don't wait. The opportunities don't pause. The people in your life don't remain unchanged while you focus elsewhere. I've had to face that directly. There were years when I was physically present in my life, present at home, present with family, but not truly there in the way that matters. My attention was somewhere else, locked onto ideas, problems, equations. And at the time, it felt justified. It felt important. But looking back now, I can see the gap between being there and actually showing up. And that gap matters. Because you cannot go back and fill it in later. You cannot reduce the entropy of those moments. You cannot restore what was never fully given. What you can do is understand it, accept it, and carry that understanding forward into whatever time remains. That's the kind of honesty I want to offer you. Not regret for the sake of emotion, but a clear accounting like the kind physics demands. Direct, unsentimental, willing to follow the truth even when it leads somewhere uncomfortable. So, here is what I got wrong, stated as simply as I can. I confused the importance of a pursuit with the importance of a person. I believe that because understanding the universe was valuable, it deserved to come first. I assumed that relationships, love, companionship, connection would take care of themselves in the background. That assumption was wrong. In reality, it's the opposite. The work, the ideas, the theories, they are durable, they persist, the papers remain, the equations don't disappear, they can be revisited, expanded, built upon. But relationships are fragile. They require attention. They require energy. They need to be maintained. Without that, they slowly lose structure, just like any physical system left alone. This is where another idea from physics becomes surprisingly relevant: the holographic principle. In simple terms, it suggests that the information inside a region of space is not determined by its volume, but by the surface that surrounds it. The depth we experience, the richness of a three-dimensional space, is actually encoded on a lower dimensional boundary. It's a strange idea, but it has powerful implications. And I think there's a parallel in life. The depth of a life, the sense that it is meaningful, rich, full, is not determined by how much activity it contains, not by how many problems you solve or how much you accomplish. Instead, it often comes from the quality of your connections, from the boundaries, from the relationships, from what you choose to be present for. The most meaningful lives I've observed are not always the most productive ones. They are the ones where attention is given carefully, where connections are maintained, where people are not treated as background elements. That realization has changed how I think about everything. But I want to be honest with you, I'm still learning this. I haven't reached some final understanding. I still feel the pull of ideas. I still wake up thinking about problems I want to solve. That part of me hasn't disappeared, and I don't think it should. But what has changed is this: I no longer believe that is the whole story. It's just one part. And for a long time, I treated it as everything. Now, I'm trying to write the rest of the story more carefully. And to do that, I had to rethink something even more fundamental: what time actually is, and what it means for the way we live. Because in physics, time is not what it feels like. At the level of our everyday experience, time seems obvious. It moves forward. The past is fixed, the future is unknown, and the present feels like something constantly slipping away. But when you look at the equations that describe reality at its deepest level, that picture starts to fall apart. In quantum mechanics, the equations are time-symmetric. They work just as well forward as they do backward. The same is true, in a different way, for general relativity. The laws themselves do not contain a preferred direction of time. The arrow of time that we feel, that sense of movement, of loss, of something passing, is not built into the fundamental rules. It emerges from something else, from entropy, from the fact that the universe began in a highly ordered state and has been moving toward disorder ever since. Time, as we experience it, is not fundamental. It's something that arises. And if you sit with that idea long enough, it becomes deeply unsettling and strangely freeing at the same time. Unsettling, because it suggests that the story we tell ourselves about our lives, the sense of moving from beginning to middle to end, is not written into the deepest structure of reality. It's something that emerges at our level of experience. But freeing, because it means something else. It means that the meaning we assign to time is not dictated by the universe. It's something we create. For most of my life, I wrote a very specific version of that story. The important moments were the breakthroughs, the insights, the equations that finally made sense, the problems that yielded after long resistance. Everything else felt like background. The time between those moments was neutral, almost invisible. But that was a mistake, because some of the most important parts of a life don't look like progress at all. They look like a conversation with no clear purpose, a quiet dinner, sitting with someone in silence, not trying to solve anything, being present without needing to produce something. For a long time, I underestimated those moments. Now I see them differently. Because if you return to the idea of entropy, something becomes very clear. Systems naturally move toward disorder unless energy is applied to maintain structure. And relationships are exactly that kind of system. They are low entropy structures. They require effort, attention, care. If you stop investing in them, they don't stay the same. They slowly lose form. They drift toward a kind of equilibrium that looks stable from the outside but lacks depth. Two people sharing space, but not really sharing anything meaningful. I've seen that happen. I've allowed it to happen. And I want to be direct with you here. If the relationships in your life still have structure, if they still carry depth, possibility, connection, do not treat them as background. Do not assume they will remain intact while you focus on other things. They won't. The maintenance is the meaning. Showing up is the substance. There isn't a deeper layer underneath that you'll get to later. That is the layer. This doesn't mean abandoning ambition or curiosity or the desire to understand. I haven't done that, and I don't think you should either. The pursuit of knowledge is still something I care about deeply. In fact, Physics right now is at one of the most interesting points it has ever reached. The standard model works incredibly well. It explains the behavior of particles and forces with remarkable accuracy. But we know it's incomplete. It doesn't include gravity. It doesn't explain dark matter or dark energy, which make up most of the universe. And the deeper we go, the more we encounter the limits of the foundation we started with. We are beginning to see that space and time themselves may not be fundamental, that they might emerge from something deeper, something we don't yet fully understand. That realization requires a kind of honesty. The willingness to say, what we built was powerful, but not complete. And that same kind of honesty is required in life. To look at what you've built, not just at the surface, but at the foundation, and ask whether it truly supports the life you want to live. That's not an easy question, but it's the one that matters most. Because once you begin to question the foundation, you realize how much of your life has been shaped by assumptions you never consciously chose. In physics, we are now at a point where we can feel the limits of those assumptions. The standard model is incredibly successful, but it leaves out too much. Gravity doesn't fit into it. Dark matter and dark energy, together making up most of the universe, are still unexplained. Even the basic constants of nature raise unanswered questions. Why these values? Why this structure? These are not minor gaps. They point to something deeper missing in the foundation. And when physicists try to go further to unify quantum mechanics with gravity, we run into a wall. Not because we lack effort or intelligence, but because the problem may exist at the level we built everything on. If space and time themselves are not fundamental, then trying to force them into a deeper theory may be the wrong approach entirely. This is where the real challenge lies. Not just solving equations, but being willing to step back and question the framework itself. To admit that what worked is not necessarily what is true at the deepest level. That kind of honesty is difficult, because what we build in physics isn't just intellectual, it becomes part of our identity. Our work reflects our thinking, and our thinking reflects who we are. So, when you question the foundation, you're not just questioning a theory, you're questioning your own past decisions. The same is true in life. The beliefs you build your life around don't feel like choices at first. They feel obvious, necessary. You follow them step by step, and over time they become the structure of your reality. And because the structure stands, you don't think to examine what's underneath. I didn't. I assumed that what mattered most was what was directly in front of me, the work, the problem, the next idea. I treated everything else as something that could wait, something that would still be there when I returned. But time doesn't work that way. There isn't always a later. Entropy doesn't pause while you focus on something else. The parts of your life that require attention don't remain unchanged while you're away. They evolve, whether you're paying attention or not. And sometimes, when you finally look back, what you find is not what you remember. That doesn't mean everything is lost. I've been fortunate. There are people in my life who stayed, who showed patience and understanding beyond what I deserved. People who continued to care even when I wasn't fully present. I'm deeply grateful for that. But I've also learned something important. Gratitude is not the same as attention. You can appreciate someone deeply and still fail to give them what they need. You can recognize their importance and still not show up in the way that matters. Gratitude is something you feel. Presence is something you do. And for most of my life, I was better at feeling than doing. Now, I'm trying to change that. I'm learning what it means to actually be somewhere, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. To give attention without dividing it. To stop carrying part of my mind somewhere else while pretending to be present. It's not easy. It doesn't come naturally to me. But I've come to believe that it's the most important discipline I've ever tried to develop. Because the universe will continue without me. The laws of physics will remain. The ideas will persist in some form. But the moments with people, the real shared moments, are limited. They are finite. And finite things demand a different kind of care. They require you to recognize that this moment is happening once. That what you do with your attention right now is not small or trivial. It is, in a very real sense, your life itself. That understanding changes how you see everything. It forces you to ask not just what is important in theory, but what you are actually giving your time to in practice. And those two things are not always aligned. Closing that gap, that is the real work. And it's not something you solve once and move on from. It's something you return to again and again, because life doesn't stay fixed. It keeps evolving, just like the systems we study in physics. What I've come to understand is that examining the foundation of your life is not a one-time realization. It's an ongoing process. Just like in science, where we revisit our assumptions as new data emerges, in life we have to periodically step back and ask ourselves whether the structure we're building still rests on the right things. Because it's very easy to let momentum take over. You follow a path that once made sense. You continue making decisions based on old priorities. And before you realize it, you're investing your time in ways that no longer reflect what you actually value. That's why I believe this kind of reflection is essential. Not optional, not something you do when everything else is finished, but something you return to regularly. To ask, what am I building on? And more importantly, is it enough? For a long time, my answer was simple. Understanding was enough. If I could just figure things out, if I could get closer to the truth of how the universe works, then everything else would fall into place. But that's not how it works. Understanding is powerful, it's meaningful, it's worth pursuing, but it doesn't automatically create a life that feels complete. It doesn't replace connection. It doesn't generate presence. It doesn't build relationships on its own. Those things require something different. They require attention, consistency, and a willingness to be there even when there is no clear outcome, no measurable progress, no visible achievement. That's a different kind of discipline. And I think in many ways it's harder because in physics, you know what you're aiming for. You have equations, predictions, results. In life, especially in relationships, the feedback is less clear. The value is not always immediate. The results are not something you can measure or prove. But that doesn't make them less real. If anything, it makes them more important. Because these are the parts of life that don't leave a permanent record. They don't exist in papers or equations. They exist in memory, in experience, in the way people feel when they are with you. And once those moments pass, they don't come back. That's the reality of irreversibility. Time moves forward. Entropy increases. The structure of a moment dissolves as soon as it happens. And what remains is only what you chose to put into it while it was there.